What's going on, everyone? Let's take a look at some updates as it relates to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. I'm recording this at 10:30 a.m. Central on Saturday, October 28th, 2023. Overnight, Israel says that they struck an additional 150 targets, both in Gaza as well as in southern Lebanon. They say those strikes killed Azam Abu Rafah, the head of Hamas's aerial array, as well as Ratab Abu Shaban, the commander of the naval force of the Gaza Brigade. There also has been an uptick in surface-to-air missile fire from Lebanon over the last couple days, which has resulted in additional Israeli airstrikes against Hezbollah targets. Now, the most recent estimates I've seen coming out of Gaza from the Gaza Health Ministry, again, worth noting that anything from the Gaza Health Ministry is at the very least vetted by Hamas before it reaches the public. They're saying that 7,703 Palestinians have so far been killed, as well as 19,734 wounded during the ongoing Israeli air campaign over Gaza. Those numbers might be harder to come by in the coming days. We're already starting to see the information start to trickle a little less frequently out of Gaza. There's been a communications blackout in Gaza over the last 24 hours, kind of on and off. You're seeing some information come out. Other channels that I've been following to try to get information out of the Gaza Strip, nothing is coming out at this point. So again, it might be challenging getting news from Palestinian sources in the near term. Now, speaking of what's going on in Gaza, I'm going to mispronounce the name here, I'm sorry. I'm just going to put his account up on the screen so you can see it. Wim Juinberg, the closest I can get. Anyways, he shared some aerial photographs of Gaza to show just the level of destruction that has taken place over the last 3 weeks due to the Israeli airstrikes. And it, reminds you of some scenes in Syria or Iraq during the fight against Islamic State when entire neighborhoods were completely razed to the ground. It reminds me of some areas in eastern and southern Ukraine right now, where there's just nothing left. And I said it when looking at pictures of Ukraine, and I'll say it now when looking at some of these pictures of Gaza. Even if the fighting were to stop today, you have a massive international effort that would be needed to rebuild some of these areas. Now, over the last 24 hours, Israel conducted what appears to be another raid into and out of Gaza. This has happened a couple nights in a row now. The most recent one was the most significant. Dozens of vehicles, and there's pretty significant fighting on the ground. There were some reports, you saw a handful of accounts across the internet start to say, this is it, this is the major invasion. The Israeli forces, however, have pulled out of Gaza, and this doesn't look like it was the main effort of what most are expecting to be the eventual invasion of Gaza. It looks like Israel pushed into Beit Lahia in the north, Burej in the middle of the Strip, and conducted a naval operation near Rafah in the south. Now, that last piece is interesting because originally Hamas came out and said they repelled this amphibious assault, and Israel didn't put out any information. Then a few hours later, Israel put out a video showing that they actually did conduct this amphibious operation, kind of another raid into Gaza and back out. Now, what it looks like we're seeing at this point, and some reports are starting to come out, that what this is are kind of last big pushes to try to convince Hamas to negotiate and release some of these hostages before the eventual main effort kicks off. But as of this recording, it does not seem like there's been any additional progress as it relates to the release of hostages. Now, in terms of these attacks, Hamas has put out some information saying that all of the Israeli attacks were repelled and that they inflicted pretty significant casualties. Really not much from the Israeli side, other than saying that these raids happened. I've already seen some pictures and videos shared in the last few hours that are years old, but they're being presented as evidence of Israeli casualties or Israeli vehicles being destroyed during this most recent raid, and that is only going to increase as the fighting continues. So as the fighting moves into Gaza, as more Israeli forces move into the ground combat phase, you're just going to see more and more old footage coming out. So just be careful. Don't automatically share everything you see. Give it a minute, wait for confirmation to come out. Now, both Israel and Hamas have pretty significant media capabilities, which from Israel, modern nation state, that's kind of what we expect. But I do think we tend to write off terrorist organizations. But if you look at Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, and now Hamas, they're pretty good on the media, PR, even propaganda side. I mean, this picture here has been circulating across Hamas social media. It's pretty clearly a rendering. I don't think it's designed to look like an actual picture or anything like that. But just, be aware. The information war is going to be on full display really in both directions as this war progresses. Speaking of the information war, here's a tough one. Not sure how Israel is going to handle this. They put out information yesterday that the Al-Shifa hospital is actually being used to protect a major Hamas military facility, both in and underneath the hospital in Gaza. Israel put out a video rendering, if you will, as well as some overhead imagery saying that there's tunnels leading underneath the facility, that there's portions of the hospital being used straight up as military facilities for Hamas. And then they've got underground storage and command and control centers underneath and tunnel networks under the hospital. The idea here, from Hamas's perspective, would be that it's a restricted area. It's a protected site that's not going to be hit. Or if it is struck, then it raises a lot of anger on the world stage, as it looks like Israel is striking hospitals. Now, the reason that Israel is putting this out is likely setting the stage for an eventual strike on this compound, right? To be able to say, look, we told you what was there. We told you what it was being used for. And in a day, a week, or a month, when it's destroyed, they'll be able to say, hey, what are we going to do? It was a military facility. They were fighting against us. It also could very well be the target of a ground incursion. Wouldn't be crazy, as the fighting continues, if a major facility like a hospital ends up kind of center stage, right? Especially if it's in or around a major Hamas underground network. Worth noting that Hamas did address these allegations. They said that they condemned Israel's statements about the Al-Shifa hospital, and they denied using medical facilities as a hideout. Now, we've got a little more information on the U.S. strikes in Syria against Iranian-backed militias a couple days ago. As a reminder, there were a couple strikes carried out in eastern Syria as a response to U.S. forces coming under fire in both Iraq and Syria over the past couple weeks. According to the DoD spokesperson, they say that the strike was carried out with a pair of F-16s dropping precision munitions, so either GPS or laser-guided bombs. Nothing really surprising there. But the Pentagon did kind of push back on a couple areas here where I was hoping we'd actually get more information. One, in terms of whether Iran directed these attacks against U.S. forces. The way that was responded to was saying, hey, this is how Iran does it. This is how they operate. They use these groups to where they have plausible deniability. So not a clear answer there. They were pushed on the name of the group. Kataib Hezbollah, that I've mentioned in a previous video, is brought up. They said, was it Kataib Hezbollah or somebody else? Do we know who these groups are that carried out these attacks or that the U.S. struck? And again, the Pentagon kind of held back. They said, look, all of these militias, all of these groups, they're Iranian aligned, and sometimes they change their names. So not getting very specific on that one either. The only thing they really dug in on was saying that these strikes were not related at all, as far as the U.S. is concerned, to the ongoing fighting between Israel and Hamas. They said it is not related to that. These strikes are exclusively in response to the strikes against U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria. This is a matter of protecting our troops independent from what is happening in Israel. Now, of course, worth noting, and they say this in the briefing, Iran might view it differently, but from the U.S. perspective, that's how it sits. Now, I reported about a week ago that U.S. Marine Lieutenant General Glenn was sent over to Israel to advise Israeli Defense Forces as they planned and executed these ground operations into Gaza. He was considered kind of the man for the job just due to his role in Ramadi, Fallujah, and eventually the fight against Islamic State in Mosul. He's back home. Now, I haven't seen any interviews or statements put out by Lieutenant General Glenn, which isn't crazy, but yesterday news came out that Marine Commandant General Smith said to a group of reporters, quote, "Make no mistake, what is or what will unfold in Gaza is purely an Israeli decision." Now, the source that put this out is reliable. He's as reliable as it gets when it comes to quoting defense officials. So I don't doubt that piece. I have not been able to find the rest of that conversation. So I don't know the broader context that was stated, which is a bit of a challenge because you can interpret this a couple ways. One is to kind of push back on the idea that Israel is waiting for the United States to say how and when they should go into Gaza. Kind of, hey, Israel is our ally. We trust them. They're going to do what they're going to do. They're not waiting on us, right? This isn't our call. We're not directing this. We're not planning this. That's one aspect. The other way to view this is that Israel has plans the U.S. doesn't really agree with or doesn't think is going to be the most effective, and Lieutenant General Glenn was not able to make any progress. You can kind of see that statement. This is purely an Israeli decision, fitting either one of those. So I'll keep an eye out for the additional context, and we'll be sure to talk about that when I find it. Now, after a couple failed United Nations Security Council resolutions, there was one passed in the General Assembly yesterday. It passed with a vote of 120 to 14 with 45 abstentions. It's a pretty good number. In the document, it called for an immediate, durable, and sustained humanitarian truce between Israeli forces and Hamas militants in Gaza. It also demanded continuous, sufficient, and unhindered provision of life-saving supplies and services for civilians trapped inside the enclave. It also called for the immediate, unconditional response of all hostages inside of Gaza. Now, a couple notable no votes, and I'll put the voting up here on the screen because there's a lot to pick through, right? I'm not going to name every country and how they voted, but a couple notable ones here. Votes against Israel and the United States. Votes in favor, a couple notable ones here, France and Russia. And then looking at some of the abstentions, Australia did not vote, neither did Canada, Germany, India, Italy, Japan, Korea, the United Kingdom, or Ukraine. Now, a little background when it comes to these United Nations resolutions. Bottom line, they don't have any muscle. So these resolutions don't really mean anything. We've seen that play out in Ukraine a couple times now. So really, if anything, these votes are just more a way of kind of understanding how the international winds are blowing. See how people feel about a certain issue. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in national security subjects, be sure to check out the sit reps I put out on Substack. Link is in the description below. 7 to 10 of the top articles each week, along with a few podcast recommendations. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.